We'll turn my mic on and, ooh, it's amplifying today. And this is business of the House, and I ask that you rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much, everybody. As I stated, this is the New Hampshire House Election Law Committee. We are scheduled for a number of public hearings this morning. These are on Senate bills that have been passed and crossed over, as they say to us. First on the agenda is SB 242, relative to the disqualification of certain persons from performing the duties of an election official. And with us is the prime sponsor, Senator Gray. Welcome to the committee, Senator Gray.
Thank you very much. For the record, I am James Gray. I represent Senate District 6, which starts in Rochester and goes up Route 11 towards Alton, Barnstead, Gilmanton. This bill is tries to correct a difference in the statute between 658-24 and 659-58, where the language is different about who can and cannot work at the elections. Pretty much what we've tried to do after consultation with the Secretary of State's office is get that language to agree with each other. And that's what this bill does. I know that you saw it before in an omnibus bill, and somehow it didn't make it all the way through the process, so we're back to try it again. Also, I think I have at least 4 bills in front of you today, but I'm also subbing as the chair. You know, when you accept the position as vice chair, and but Senator Bradley, who is the chair of Health and Human Services, has had his flight canceled down in Florida to get back. So I'm trying to split my time between. Will be a surrogate here for me for a couple of those bills, and I'll be back with you as best I can when time permits. And if there's any questions on this one, I'll hear those now. And if there's any questions on the other ones, and you'd like to communicate with me, certainly best way is either call my cell or call Shannon, and she will get us together.
Thank you. Senator, I'll have the first question. Does Senator Bradley understand that the payback for having to spend more time in Florida will be a lot more than chairing one of your meetings?
Well, you know, I guess I didn't say on the phone this morning when he told me that the second flight was canceled that he owed me, but I think it's understood.
All right. Questions for Senator Bradley on SB 242. Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, and thank you, Senator Gray. This is a little bit of a hair-splitting question, but in your conversations, and this refers to the processing of absentee ballots, in your conversations with the Secretary of State, did it ever come up that it might be possible to like cordon off an area within the voting part, you know, behind the checklist, to be used for the processing of absentee ballots? Because I'm trying to think of a situation if a moderator is required under state law.
Just for clarification, does this deal specifically with this bill, or is this a question for Senator Gray in light of his attendance issues?
It is for Senator Gray.
Okay.
I
just don't want people looking at the bill wondering what absentee ballot.
And I guess I'm making it longer than I need to. I'm just wondering.
I think I understand the question. Yeah. The question, you know, because what we do propose in the bill is that if the moderator's name is on the ballot, you know, for other reasons other than being a moderator, that they should not touch a voted ballot, and that would preclude them from processing those absentee ballots. And I fully agree that he or she, the moderator, should designate one of his alternates or whatever to process those absentee ballots, and should not. In the 20 plus years that I was a moderator, anytime my name was on the ballot for school board or city council, you know, I did participate in the pre-counting of the ballots before the opening of the election. I did, participate in some of the other, but things that the moderator would do, like assisting a voter in the voting booth, or any of those things, and also processing of absentee ballots, I always deferred that to someone else, which I believe is appropriate.
Further question?
Further question?
Then would I be correct in saying that within the voting area, behind the checklist, where the public cannot roam, if the moderator cordoned off an area where absentee ballots would be processed, he could not go into that area, but he could still be in other portions of the non-public area of the voting place?
The bill specifically doesn't talk about him being cordoned off from anything. The bill talks about touching the ballot.
Okay.
So as long as they're not touching that voted ballot or assisting a voter, then the bill would allow them to do those duties. Certainly, one of the duties that the moderators should be doing that some don't is observing the length of the lines, especially in registration and others. I've taken, checklists, the A to K, and split them in half for 5 or 10 minutes because of a long line. I have done other things in the registration table. So there's lots of things the moderator can do and that don't involve touching a voted ballot.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Further questions for Senator Gray? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much.
All right,
Good luck
thank
on
you,
the rest
and
of your
Nick-
morning.
Again, I apologize.
No issues. All right, we'll be in recess for 5 minutes. 9:45. So I'm going to declare it to be 9:45 in this room and open the public hearing on SB 328. This is relative to the date of the state primary election. As the committee is aware, Senator Gray, the prime sponsor, has a number of other things going on this morning, and welcome to Grant Bossy for Senator Gray. Good morning.
Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the Election Law Committee. It's good to be here. I am Grant Bossy from the New Hampshire Senate, here to introduce Senate Bill 328 on behalf of its prime sponsor, Senator James Gray of Rochester. New Hampshire currently has the latest state primary election in the nation. This year, it'll be held on September 13th, along with Delaware and Rhode Island. This gives the major party nominees just 8 weeks to mount a general election campaign, often against an incumbent who didn't have to fight through a primary. Add in recounts, appeals to the Ballot Law Commission, you're quickly getting to less than 50 days from Election Day before we know who will actually be on our ballots. This puts tremendous pressure on our election officials to print absentee and oversee ballots. They always get it done, but it's really, really tight. So there's broad agreement that we should hold our primaries earlier. The question is when. The governor, very publicly concerned about turnout if we hold a primary over the summer when people are out on vacation, kids are out of school. Last year, the House position was to move the primary to June, and the Senate disagreed. The Senate holds that June is the wrong time, as it would force sitting legislators to file and run a campaign when their time is most in demand here in Concord. What we're doing here today, this week, exceptionally busy after crossover. You've got all our bills, we've got all your bills. The House and Senate are spending all of their time doing the job that they were elected to do for $100 a year. Senator Gray, who you heard from today, is currently over in HHS hearing 10 of your bills, which you obviously want the Senate to give consideration. Now imagine that this week were also the filing period for House and Senate members to decide if they were going to run for re-election, or if they had a candidates night, or a debate, or an interview for their re-election campaign. The Senate position is that it is the wrong time for especially state House legislators to be filing and running for re-election in a primary. Senate Bill 328 was amended on the Senate floor to move the primary date to the second week in August. That's 1 week off from the bill passed last year out of the Senate, allowing candidates a chance to finish their work in the legislature before returning to the campaign trail. This would give the Secretary of State's office more time to prepare UCAVA and absentee ballots. This amendment received a strong 19-5 vote, showing the Senate's strong preference for an August primary as opposed to one in June. Summer primaries are actually quite common across the country. In fact, 14 states will hold their primary elections in August this year, according to NCSL, as close as our neighbors in Vermont, as far away as Alaska and Hawaii. If you have any questions on this, I would be happy to pass them along to Senator Gray. I would also encourage you to just send them to Shannon. She tends to get answers pretty quickly. We ask for your consideration of Senate Bill 328, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Representative Bergeron.
Thank you. And this is probably a question that the sponsors will need to answer. However, are you aware that the bill provides that the last date for a correction to the checklist before filing would be the Tuesday before the first Wednesday in May? However, checklists are closed earlier than that for towns that are holding May town elections. And for example, this year, that closing date is April 30th. Mm-hmm. So I guess if you could ask Senator Gray if he would be amenable to perhaps amending that language so that the problem is addressed.
He shared your email with me. He's aware of the concern, and if the committee thinks that they can harmonize those, New Hampshire has a lot of elections, and if we want to harmonize all those dates, he'd be open to seeing your solution.
Thank you.
Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for taking the question. So I'm clear on what the primary date is. In essence, it's pretty much exactly a month earlier than what it is currently. Does this affect the filing date for running for office at all?
Yes, everything else would be moved up by approximately a month.
Okay, thanks.
Representative McDonald.
Morning, Mr. Bossy. This bill, as you mentioned, is very similar to the one that the governor vetoed last year. One of his concerns at the time was the recruitment of election workers and so forth. Is that in any way a concern in this bill? And if I may also ask, Madam Chairman, do you expect a different outcome from the governor this time? I know you can't speak for him, but is there any reason to expect a different outcome?
I think we can make the case we've made. There are competing interests. A lot of the bills, all the easy laws have been passed. You're left with the tough ones, and so there are competing values that are all valid. The Senate believes that a June primary balances those the best. The governor disagrees. The House has disagreed in the past. So we are hoping we might be able to persuade him this time.
Follow up, Madam Chairman?
Follow up.
And just to be totally clear, I think I totally understand what you're talking about. So you're saying that a June primary would interfere with legislative duties, and that is why you amended the bill, the Senate amended the bill?
That was a common argument on the Senate floor as we were debating this over actually several weeks. We special ordered it a few times to try to get a consensus, and we eventually got a 19-5 vote in favor of the August primary. And the most common argument raised was that senators and House members are here in June. Not this year, we hope to get out in May, but certainly in April and May and into June, they're getting their work done. They've got deadlines, they've got committees of conference, and a filing period right at the end of session, a primary over June, July, and August, and then a primary held in August, they felt was the best balance of that time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Further questions from the committee? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Bossy. We do have other people signed up
Thank
to
you.
speak on this bill. Also signed up to speak on SB 328 relating to the date of the primary is Alvin C. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name's Alvin C. I live in Loudon, and I'm here
what's
on my
yours?
own
Yours
behalf
one.
and in support of this bill. I fully support moving the primary election earlier. I think the final candidates for the general election need more time to campaign. But what I want to address here today is an unintended consequence of moving the primary. And that is that the candidates who file by nomination papers, all the dates specified in the bill or in the RSAs regarding the filing of papers are tied to the primary. The declaration of candidacy has to be filed during the primary filing period, and then the dates for getting the papers to the towns, to the checklist, supervisors a checklist to check, and then on back to the Secretary of State's office are all tied to a certain number of weeks before the primary. I would like to suggest that in RSA 655 14A, 41, and 43, some changes on that. And this is something that I've provided before on testimony last year on the couple of bills that went through. But in 655 14A, I would suggest that the instead of having the declaration of candidacy be filed during the primary filing period, that it would be specified as 15 weeks before the general election. That is a slight change. It makes it slightly later, but for minor parties, they sometimes have national conventions, usually in the time frame of between Memorial Day and Independence Day. So that would give them time to select at least for presidential candidates. Then for 655-41, instead of 2 weeks before the primary, set it for 10 weeks before the general election. And that's for the candidate having his papers submitted. The papers, the supervisor of the check, they need to go to the supervisor of the check weeks 13 weeks before the general election rather than 5 weeks before the primary. The supervisor of the checklist have to have them completed 10 weeks before the general election instead of 2 weeks before the primary. And then the final one was getting them to the Secretary of State, which currently in 655-43 says 1 week before the primary. This would make it 9 weeks before the general election. And these, I just went through the political calendar that we use and just counted back from based on this year and 2 years ago. I realize this bill doesn't take effect till next year, so it would not affect this year. And just for reference, that 15 weeks before the general election, if it were this year, would be July 27th. The Secretary of State has been given a copy of this. I have not heard back from him whether there was any issues on this, but it's basically identical to what it is right now, with the exception of the declaration of candidacy. And I'll be happy to take any questions if there are any.
Thank you, Mr. C. Any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Also signed up to speak on SB 328 is Dan McGuire, the Honorable Dan McGuire from Epsom.
Formerly, I guess.
I think you're always
You're
honorable
always, yeah.
at that point.
Possibly future. All right. Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. For the record, my name is Dan McGuire. I'm from the town of Epsom. I'm in favor of moving the primary. I actually would prefer the June date, but I think this is a reasonable compromise. The current calendar is very much to the liking of the House members, I think. In general, when you're a House member, you don't have to raise much money for your campaign. Typically, people fund their own campaigns. Most members either will have the general election will be the significant election for them, or the primary election will be the significant election for them, not both. And it's very comfortable to finish your work, if you're an incumbent House member, to finish your work in the House in June, sign up for re-election. If the primary is your primary election, work on it over the summer and have it and you're done. If the general is your primary election, you coast during the summer, and then 2 months is plenty to run for the House. But if you're someone trying to break into one of the higher offices, the statewide offices or executive council and so on, then this current schedule is really bad for you. It's very favorable for incumbents, but it's very very difficult for challengers, because those are offices that require a lot of money for ads and staff and all that sort of thing. And so frequently when you're a challenger, when you're an incumbent, you typically are not seriously challenged in the primary, right? Someone who's an incumbent can frequently, is nearly guaranteed, not always obviously, but nearly guaranteed to win their primary. And so they know they're going to be in the general election, and they know they can spend the summer raising money and getting prepared for the general election and so on, getting their staff together and all that. But frequently, there's multiple, in the other party, there's multiple challengers. They don't know if they're going to be the winner. It's frequently competitive. And so they don't find out to mid-September whether or not they're going to have a general election. And that leaves them such a short time, 2 months, to raise money, get a general election campaign together, and go up against a typically much better funded incumbent. So this bill expands that period of time, that general election period, by about 50%, right? So it's currently roughly 2 months. It adds a month to it. So that's a significant improvement and makes it a little bit fairer. I mean, clearly incumbents will still have big advantages. There's no way around that. But this makes that crucial period prior to the general election roughly 50% longer, and that I think is very important for fairness for challengers. So it's not as fun, it's not as nice for House members, but it's not that much different, I don't think, and it's something I would hope that you would pass. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Questions for Mr. McGuire? Seeing none, thank you.
Yeah, you've had this bill over and over, so.
Well, it's nice to hear that House members have it easier on something. There you go. Also signed up to speak on this is Patricia Lovejoy from the Secretary of State's office.
Good morning, Madam Chair. Thank you. My name is Patricia Lovejoy. I am the Senior Deputy Secretary of State. On this bill 328, the date of the primary, the Secretary of State's position is we're concerned about voter turnout. New Hampshire has a history of very good voter turnout, even in our primaries, and we're concerned that August is a time of vacation, kids are out of school. It's a summer state of mind. Unlike many of us who've been involved in politics, many of the general public do not tune in to politics until the calendar turns over to September. So we're concerned about the turnout. That's our biggest concern. Just a couple other issues for you to keep in the back of your mind. During the sign-up period, this is in May, we do have an alternate town election day, which is in May. There are many of our municipalities that have their elections at that time. This year, that date is May 10th. So it can be a concern for town clerk's offices. We are also concerned about the recruitment of workers at the polls. Obviously, every 10 years when we have redistricting, districts are not always set. This bill does, on page 1, in lines 5 through 7, does give the Secretary of State's office the ability to change the date of the primary and the date of the signups. Currently, the governor has signed the House districts, but those are the only ones that are set in stone at this point. And we are in the first week of April, so that if the primary is, the sign-up is the beginning of May, depending upon how long that process takes, you may have every 10 years that the primary is moved off. So we just wanted to bring those concerns to you. I would be willing to take any questions.
Questions for Ms. Lovejoy. Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Deputy Secretary. So we've heard this legislative year from many of the concern that you heard from the last couple of speakers on this legislation, of the concern with the very tight time frame between the primary date and the general election date. How do we balance that very, I think, real concern with the concern that you bring up? Does your department have an alternate date they might suggest?
We actually prefer the current date that we have, but as far as the time period for us getting ballots and UOCAVA ballots, we have always managed to do that, even though it is a tight time frame. I guess the reason you get paid the big bucks is to make these decisions. Obviously, whatever decision the legislature and the governor signs off on, we will make work. Like I said, our big concern is voter turnout. I mean, we are always concerned about keeping our first in the nation primary, and one of the factors that does go into that choosing of who is going to be the first in the nation primary is voter turnout.
Follow-up.
Quick follow-up. I'm glad you brought that up, because in order to keep that first in the nation primary, we usually have a very early primary for that. So that kind of contradicts what you said in regard to September. But I don't know if you have any comments on that.
No, I think I understand I get the irony. But as far as for our state elections, the Secretary's State's office prefers the September primary, but we will make whatever you decide and whatever the legislature and the governor decides work. We just wanted to bring our concerns to you to have while you're making that decision.
Thank you. Representative McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Good morning.
Good morning.
You had mentioned that the May filing period would be of concern for local election officials, and I know that was a concern if it was filing period ended up being in March for a June primary. And I don't know if you can answer this question. Obviously, you're not a local election official, but do you have any insight in terms of how town clerks and other local election officials around the state generally regard a possible state primary change?
We have not polled them. I don't know. But I'm sure that those that have the May elections, which obviously is a much smaller portion of our municipalities, but we do have municipalities that use that alternate date in May. Those town clerks, I'm sure, would be concerned. They would be outnumbered by by others, but for those that do have the May date, this puts more work into a shorter period of time.
Thank you.
Further questions from committee members? Seeing none, thank you for being
Thank you.
with us this morning. I'm going to close the hearing on SB 328. Our next hearing is on 364. This is relative to the use of electronic poll books. The prime sponsor on this bill is Senator Perkins Coca. Is there anybody here to introduce this bill? Representative Hayward, would you be a sport and introduce this bill, please? He's my backup. See the face? I haven't decided whether he's going to have to take questions or not yet.
So, thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate
Welcome to the committee this morning.
So, we have before us is Senate Bill 364. It's an act relative to the use of electronic poll books. And this is an obvious outcome of a study that had been looked at in the past. So, with subject to your questions.
Thank you, Representative Hayward. That was terrific. And I don't think anybody has any questions. You're all
I
set.
appreciate that as well. Thank you.
I don't have anybody else signed up. Oh, I do. I'm sorry. Patricia Lovejoy from the Secretary of State. Thank you for signing up for this.
There we go. Once again, good morning. Patricia Lovejoy, the Secretary of State's office. This bill is related to the electronic polls, the e-books. It's a simple correction. It relates to the maximum time lag between when the electronic poll books have to be updated with the paper books, and it changes it from 10 to 30 minutes. After a thorough e-poll book pilot program, the General Court enacted a permanent electronic poll book program. And after being in effect for several municipalities and special elections, the local clerks and election officials brought to light a few things that they wish to have changed, and this is the major one. So it gives poll workers a little additional time. More and more towns have been using the e-poll books, and those that have used it have been extremely happy with it. I expect that as time goes by, more and more towns will be adopting it. It moves the lines through much more quickly. We do have a RFP out that we expect is going to, that the work will be done in time for this year's election, which will allow the e-poll books to automatically update the voter registration system. Currently, right now, what your town, what your supervisors of the checklist do at the end of each election, if I'm sure you were all familiar with the check-in forms, and there is a little scan barcode, and the supervisors of the checklist afterward have to go through, line by line, everyone who voted, and scan it into the voter registration system. With the new changes that will be made to the e-poll book, which we are quite sure will be available for this November, the system will automatically update it. And that will include, if somebody has, now if you've used a Massachusetts license as your ID, it is, we note on the checklist that it was from Massachusetts. Even that kind of information will be updated automatically through the poll books. So this is really a relatively simple change of giving them a little bit of additional time lag between updating the poll books and the paper backup.
Thank you. Questions for Ms. Lovejoy? Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Deputy Secretary of State. How well backed up is the electronic poll book? How well backed up it is electronically?
It is, I'm not as much of a I can't give you the exact technical terms, but it is very well backed up. They have been tested significantly, and that's why there's a continual backup also with the paper checklist.
Follow-up?
Follow-up.
Thank you. So if the primary electronic system fails within that 30 minutes, it is already thoroughly backed up electronically?
It's backed up electronically, and we are printing out the
Right.
the paper one also.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions? I have one. How many towns have used it? Do you know?
I don't have the number off the top of my head.
I mean, are we talking 2 or are we talking
Oh no, there's more
7?
than there's more than that. There were several that started doing the original testing. I don't know how many. There are additional ones that have signed up for this year, but I don't have that number. I can get that to you though.
Okay. All right, I'm not seeing any more questions, so thank you very much. Also signed up for this, for speaking on this is Natchez Grays from NHMA.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Nate Grace from the New Hampshire Municipal Association. We support this change. As the Deputy Secretary of State stated, this simply increases the amount of time for the parallel check-in lag time to be no more than 30 minutes instead of the current 10. And my understanding for that request is that it was simply because typically when an issue arises as a technical issue and they're trying to troubleshoot it, it might take a little bit more than 10 minutes. As far as the chair's question for movement towards electronic poll books, I can tell you that every year NHMA does do a training for moderators. For the past several years, we've emphasized kind of this electronic poll book shift and usage, and there's been an incredibly high amount of interest in that because of the speed at which that can increase elections and ensure that that everything is being done correctly and at the same time. So I would imagine that in the next few years we'll see most municipalities that have good internet connectivity at their polling locations try to shift towards electronic poll books.
Thank you. Questions? Seeing none? Thank you.
Thank you.
Is there anybody else here who wants to speak on 364? I'm not seeing anybody, so at this time I'm going to close the hearing on 364. Our next hearing is 365 relative to absentee ballot outer envelopes, and that is not scheduled to commence until 10:30. So we have a 15-minute recess. Thank you, everybody.
I actually do have it on my phone, although I don't,
Dublin is a really fun city. There's lots going on. There's music. There's the food. You can eat Indian food in Dublin. You don't have really good salmon.
You're going to say representative Taylor?
Yeah, the food was not. The food didn't stink. It just wasn't fabulous. It was just kind of. Oh, they did. Oh, that was the worst thing. They did this thing, fried
All right, it is 10:30 by at least one of the timepieces available to me. The House Election Law Committee is back in session. We are scheduled for a public hearing relative to the absentee ballot outer envelope. And here to present the bill to the committee is the prime sponsor. Welcome back, Senator Gray.
Thank you for the record, even though I'm a little out of breath. My name is James Gray. I'm Senator representing District 6, which starts in Rochester, goes up Route 11 to Alton, Barnstead, and Gilmanton. One of the big successes that we had during the past elections was the ability to pre-process the absentee ballots. It was well received by moderators, well received by a lot of the people. I tell people that a lot of the things that they did about marking the checklist can actually be done automatically, but the other thing is the absentee ballots, being able to open that outer envelope and be able to identify the signatures. One of the things that was most beneficial to the voter was the ability to correct any errors that were found, either missing signatures or other problems with that ballot. So the question came up is, okay, well, why do we have an outer envelope? And the only reason we have an outer envelope, really, from what I've been able to find out, is when I go put it in the mail, I need a place to put the stamps and the address. Okay, well, then a person who votes at the city or town hall in person, why do they need an outer envelope? The answer is they don't. And if they don't have the outer envelope, they hand me back the ballot. I can look at the signature if I'm the clerk and say, well, you know, you probably ought to, you know, sign it down here where you're supposed to, or whatever else is the problem. And give them that ability to correct their signature right there. If one comes in the mail, there's no reason for it to be part of the absentee ballot process, which is the way the law was structured prior to this. The clerk ought to be able to open those envelopes, attach all of the appropriate forms, and the disability people will say that amendment that they would like to this bill, and hopefully I've talked them out of some of it, but there is a form right now, and that could be attached also along with the application, and I'm sure that if they choose to, they'll be able to testify on that. But again, you know, that's a training thing, but the application can be stapled to it. We were asked by the clerks to also include the address so that it was easier. I'm told that children right now in schools are taught how to make a cursive first letter of their first name and a cursive first letter of their last name and then make a squiggle. Believe it or not, that's what I've been told. And so trying to decipher some of those, and I'm going to put air quotes around it, signatures are very difficult. So having the address in there, which was added to the bill, will be very helpful to the clerks. This also, because we have an injunction against looking at the signatures because of a court order. The two things that the court said, if you want to go back and check signatures, the things that you need to do is, one, give the voter the ability to correct if they did something wrong. This does that. And the other thing is training in the signatures, and that would be something that the Secretary of State would do to those individuals. And at that time, the Secretary of State probably would be able to petition the court to lift the court order and, again, go back to at least reviewing those signatures. On that note, I want to tell you, in the 20-plus years that I was a moderator, I used to look for reasons to accept the signatures, not reasons to reject the signatures, which is very important when we're looking at these affidavits. I used to go to the original application, which used to be at the polls, and look at the printing, because sometimes the printing told me more about that person. And if E had the little circle here or a straight line here, that I use that as a reason to say that there is more evidence than not that the signature is made by the right individual. And with that, I will offer myself for other questions before I run back across the street. And I did gain my breath back, so, you know.
Questions from committee members for Senator Gray? I'm not seeing any. Thank you. Have a nice stroll.
Thank you now.
All right.
And how did Grant do? Did he do well for me?
Fine. Also signed up to speak on 365 is Karen Rosenberg and James Zegra. Zegra. Why don't you can both come on up.
Thank you.
I got it right. Welcome.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning. For the record, I'm Karen Rosenberg. I'm the Policy Director at Disability Rights Center, and this is my colleague.
I'm James Zegra. I'm a staff attorney at Disability Rights Center.
So I think I violated a prime directive, which is the KISS rule, keep it simple and stupid, when I discussed an issue that our office identified with this bill. So I brought James here to explain to you why we think that although the bill was intended to just eliminate the rule for the requirement of the outer envelope, that there may be some risk without a tiny adjustment that certain votes may be not counted for people with disabilities. So I'm going to have James explain that to you because he knows this far better than I do.
All right. Thank you.
Sure. Good morning. So the concern with the bill that we have as written is that it doesn't account for a new accessible absentee voting program that was put into place by the Secretary of State in 2020. Essentially, the program allows people with print disabilities who are blind or who are otherwise unable to fill out a paper ballot on their own to complete a ballot privately and independently. So without getting too into the weeds about this accessible absentee program, basically eligible voters request that a ballot is sent to them, and along with the ballot is a separate voter affidavit that is sent to them. The voter will fill out the affidavit and fill out their ballot electronically. They print out a piece of paper with the ballot, print out a piece of paper with their affidavit, and they put the ballot inside the affidavit envelope just like every other voter does. But the instructions that the Secretary of State's office gives to voters says that they should take that affidavit, that separate printed affidavit, and put that in the outer mailing envelope. Because these folks have print disabilities, they're not able to sign the envelopes themselves, the affidavit envelope, like most voters. So in lieu of that, they fill out a separate affidavit, put it inside the mailing envelope, and either hand deliver it or they mail it to the city or town clerk. Now, the problem with, well, it's not really a problem, but it's just maybe perhaps a small oversight with the bill is that the voters are instructed to put it in the outer envelope, and the state election officials are instructed that this affidavit is going to come separately in that outer envelope as well. However, the bill doesn't have any guidance in it to tell elected officials that they need to somehow secure this affidavit to the affidavit envelope. So as a consequence, what might happen is that the town clerk, when they're pre-processing the outer envelopes, something may happen to that affidavit, and it may not be attached properly or affixed to that inner affidavit envelope. And when that happens, come election day, that ballot could be tossed because there's no signature on the affidavit envelope. So even though the voter had filled out their affidavit in accordance with the instructions provided to them by the Secretary's office, their vote may not count. And so we just wanted to address that concern and raise it with the committee.
So I actually brought a one-paragraph potential amendment that you might consider, which I provided to Representative Griffin, but I have copies for you all if.
I don't think I actually took it because I have this thing about getting paper before it's time to look at it. So if you can give it to Representative Quayle and then have him pass it to Representative Hayward, and we'll get it around. I'm having a little trouble putting my hands around what it is you're talking about as far as the issue. And Representative Bergeron, before open it up to further questions. Do we have anything currently in a bill that is providing for pre-processing?
I can't think of anything. I can't recall seeing any House or Senate bills that dealt with the matter of pre-processing.
And the pre-processing expired under current law, given the way it was passed for 2020, correct?
Correct. There is a statute in existing law which I believe allows election officials to tear open the outer envelope prior to Election Day, but they can't remove anything from it. It's just a matter of taking letter openers, and I don't really know how much time that saves anybody anyway. But that's the only thing I can think of in terms of pre-processing.
Thank you. Before we go on, what is this?
So I've also, just for your information, this is a settlement agreement that the Secretary of State's office
good
entered
night.
into.
Yeah,
And the reason it's
Okay,
tabbed
thanks.
is it
Let's-
has the process tabbed, so you can see what the process is
Okay.
that they agreed to.
All right. So I'm not clear that there's any provision for pre-processing, so we're going to have to, there has not been unanimity between the House and the Senate on that procedure.
Interesting.
So,
So really, all we just want to make sure is that these affidavits that people who either can't see to hand fill a document or can't physically handwrite the affidavit, that their affidavits are not lost and separated from their actual ballots. So that's why it really could be accomplished with a very simple one paragraph, I think, amendment for your,
okay,
so.
which is what you passed out, the
That's what I
amendment to
passed out
657-18.
originally, but then I thought, for your information, that you might want to see the procedure, so that's why I handed out the settlement agreement and tabbed the procedure, if you felt like reading that, because it's not necessary.
Okay, Representative Hayward.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking this question. Without the benefit of your one paragraph, what you described to me, do you think that that is a requirement in the RSA, or is that better served as a direction on by exception from the Secretary of State?
Well, I suppose it could be in the, included in the election procedure manual that the Secretary of State publishes and distributes every year. And certainly the Secretary of State has published guidance to local election officials about how to address these accessible absentee votes. That is one avenue for it, but my concern is that if it's not codified into law, there's no statutory requirement for election officials to attend training from the Secretary of State's office, so things may fall through the cracks.
There's also in the bill as it currently is written, there is a provision in section 4 that talks about attaching the application for an absentee ballot to the ballot. So there is some guidance, there is something in the statute about that application, but not the affidavit. So I don't know if that would create some confusion to only have in statute that you attach the application and not have in statute that you also attach that separately printed affidavit if it's used.
Okay. Questions from committee members? Thank you, Representative Hamblett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question's actually for you, or maybe for you. I'm confused as to, this doesn't have to be done in a pre-processing session, right? This can be done right at the, right, whenever the clerk receives the absentee ballot, or whenever they receive it at the polls, they just kind of process it the way they do now. I didn't think it required a pre-processing session.
Yeah, perhaps I misspoke and did not realize that pre-processing was a term of art, but
Excuse me for a minute. Are there extras of the one-page amendment somewhere? There, right there. Olivia has them for you, Representative Gwaley. I'm sorry for that interruption.
oh, that's okay. Perhaps I misspoke about the term pre-processing. What I meant was the ability for local city and town clerks or election officials to open up the outer envelopes ahead of time, which, you know, I agree is a great thing. I think it makes it more efficient, and I understand that the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive throughout the state. My concern is that that separate affidavit that is printed out may get lost in the shuffle if there's nothing to mandate that it gets attached.
Just for the record.
Thank you.
My town will not be doing pre-processing in the future. They didn't think the process was worth the effort. And created a lot of questions and problems. Other questions from committee members? Representative Muirhead.
Thank you. Is the separate printed affidavit put inside the inner envelope? No, it's
No.
inside the, okay, just, sorry.
It's in the outer envelope. So that
May I have a follow-up?
because the ballot would then be private, right?
Thank you. Follow-up, thank
Yep.
you. It looks to me like your proposed amendment tries to solve a problem that is already there in the law and not a problem that's being introduced by this proposed piece of legislation. The ambiguity about what to do with this printed affidavit is already present in the RSAs, and it's not an ambiguity introduced by this piece of legislation. Is that fair to say?
I think that's a fair assessment because this program is so new. It just debuted in the 2020 election. It is something that the statutes haven't addressed yet.
The statutes have not addressed this.
Have not addressed yet, yes.
Right. Okay. I'm going to hope that Ms. Lovejoy is going to chime in on this when this is over, though I don't have a pink card from her. All right, any further questions? I'm seeing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you so
Thank
much
you.
for your time.
Yeah, that's fine. You can get it to me afterwards.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Patricia Lovejoy, Secretary of State's Office. Obviously, what the last speaker was talking about for the ability for someone who is visually impaired to print off their ballot, as part of the training, clerks are being informed that they need to be kept with the affidavit envelope, because they obviously haven't filled out the affidavit envelope. They have printed off their affidavit. Currently, without this law, we are not opening the envelopes until the day that you process them.
All right, so just to interrupt,
Yes.
so I'm correct that the underlying statute in this that we're amending is not in effect.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. So what this bill is doing, you submit your absentee ballot by mail. This allows the clerk to open the outside envelope, eyeball it, say the person didn't sign it or they didn't check off their reason. So they would notify the voter that you need to come in and cure your affidavit.
And just for clarification on the process, that's because this particular voter, as compared to the voters we may have just heard
Yes.
about, has been able to actually complete the outer envelope that holds the ballot. So
Yes.
when the outer envelope is opened, the clerk is looking at that completed outer envelope.
Correct. And in these voters' case, when they open the envelope, the outside envelope, they would find this piece of paper
Okay, so
inside.
let's just back up from a procedural, because sometimes I pretend to be an engineer and need things in process.
Okay.
So when someone is using this process because of disability and
Yes.
doing their electronically provided ballot, they are not able to do the envelope affidavit.
Correct.
So without this piece of paper, this particular ballot that's printed off as allowed by law as compared to the official ballot that gets sent to some people, gets put in that envelope, the
Yes.
affidavit envelope, but there is no ability to complete the outer envelope. So this Secretary of State's office, under this agreement, which is not in law, it's part of a case settlement, has a separate affidavit that is then able to be done for this particular absentee ballot.
Correct. So the
And
voter,
is this
yes.
affidavit that's printed off done by the disabled voter?
Yes.
Or by a person assisting that voter?
It can be either.
Okay, so if it's a person assisting the voter, can't they do the outer envelope?
They potentially could. I'm thinking of one of my neighbors. She has macro degeneration. She can blow something up on her computer screen and complete this and print it off, submit it, put it into the outside envelope, and that would go to the town clerk. When the town clerk opens, the affidavit envelope is not going to be completed at all, but there will be this special affidavit in effect that takes the place of the outside part of the affidavit envelope. Their ballot is still inside that envelope. But that would only occur if this bill is passed. Now, when the clerk receives the absentee ballot by mail, they can slit it open, look into it, look at the affidavit envelope to make sure that it was properly done. No, without this bill, all of that happens on election day. And this bill also says that if you are going to the town clerk's office and voting in person, absentee, there's no reason for the outside envelope. I mean, that you complete the affidavit envelope, put your ballot inside. There's no reason to then take that one and put it inside another outside envelope because you're not mailing it. You're handing it to the town clerk.
Right. Okay, and is a member of the committee correct in that the clerk's office is allowed to open as it is now, without this bill, is allowed to open the outer envelope before Election Day?
They can slit them open, but that's it. They don't do...
They don't look.
They don't look. Don't peek.
Okay. So is the problem that they are trying to address by this amendment in existence regardless of whether 365 passes or not?
Could you restate that?
Well, currently, 365 is essentially not in law. The pre-processing is not part of the law.
Correct.
And it appears to me, and I'm sorry, committee members, for monopolizing this, but I'm really having a hard time following what the issue is here. So it appears to me that currently on Election Day, absent the slitting open of the envelope, perhaps, the envelope with the ballot and the affidavit as is currently provided in law are together on that day at that place. The issue becomes, if it is looked at before Election Day, that there is concern, the issue as I understand it, is that the affidavit that under this settlement process is being printed separately has no place in law as it is currently in existence to keep it with the ballot envelope. So that if you pre-process these ballots and there is no specific provision to attach this affidavit to the ballot envelope. Between the time of pre-processing and the election, if something happens to that affidavit and it gets separated, you will now have an absentee ballot with an envelope that has not been completed at all, and therefore it will be ruled invalid by the moderator and not counted. And that, so this issue only comes up with the pre-processing, because if you open it all on election day, it should be there with the ballot.
It will be there with the ballot.
Okay.
Part of this
Now
is,
we got it.
what is the problem that we're trying to,
Right,
that this bill is trying to correct? Many times we have bills that are in search of a problem, but what is the problem that's trying to be corrected here? In this last election, when we did the pre-processing in many, many towns, they found several affidavit envelopes that were not properly completed. I helped with doing the pre-processing in my town, and there were some people who just forgot to sign it. And because this happened a few days beforehand when we did the pre-processing, it was easier to contact those voters and say, there's a problem with your absentee ballot, with your affidavit. You can either come and vote in person that day if you are now able to, or you can come in ahead of time and correct this problem. If you open everything on election day and you don't start till, say, noon, the ability to contact that voter and so that they could come in and cure the
But
absent.
that's a different issue than the amendment. The amendment is trying to address the issue
That's
of
that's what this
envelope.
bill, we don't have an amendment yet, but a potential
The
amendment.
proposed, I'm
The
sorry,
proposed
there's-
amendment.
it's not a
This bill
Okay.
is, that's the problem that this bill was trying to address, was that there are people who incorrectly fill out their affidavit envelopes, forget to sign them, et cetera. And this gives the town clerk the ability to just look. They're not pre-processing. I mean, they're not pre-processing. They're just opening it up, looking at it. Does it appear, is there anything obvious that we need to have the voter come in and correct? So that's what the purpose of this bill is. The amendment, if you did that and you opened up the envelope and it has this special affidavit, nobody is taking anything out of the envelope. So that special affidavit that's been printed off, that's not using the affidavit envelope, would not be being removed. Nothing is being removed from the envelope. It's the ability to look at it, see if something needs to be cured, and be able to contact the voter. That's the logic behind what this bill is trying to do.
All right, I think I got it now.
Okay. Any other questions?
Any other questions now that the chair has monopolized that? Sorry. I should have made widgets as a child. Representative
I
Muirhead.
just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for monopolizing that now I think I understand it.
Okay.
And I will fill out a pink card.
Thank you. That is my last speaker on 365. Is there anybody else here who wants to speak on 365? Not seeing anyone, I'm going to close the public hearing and open the public hearing on SB 366, requiring an audit of ballots cast in the election. Senator Gray needed to leave, and Representative Hayward, can you just grab a pink card and introduce this again for us? Oh, I'm sorry. I'm here for Senator Gray. Oh, you are, thank you. Okay, great. And if you can just give me a pink card when you're done. It's up there. It is? Yes.
It's coming, I guess. No, it was up there earlier. Oh.
Yep, sorry, Miss Alfano. Welcome. Sorry I made your entrance so dramatic here.
No problem. Good morning, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I am Carol Alfano. I'm the Senate Communications Director, and it's my privilege to introduce Senate Bill 366 for its prime sponsor, Senator Jim Gray from Rochester, District 6. This bill requires the Secretary of State to conduct an audit of ballots cast in the 2022 state primary and general elections. A random selection of the AccuView vote machines will be chosen from across the state to be audited by a high-speed scanner certified by the Ballot Commission. This bill was a recommendation and includes the recommendations of the committee to the committee to study post-election audit counting devices. Senator Gray appreciates your support on SB 366. That concludes my introduction, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you. I didn't hear a big opening for questions, but does anybody have any questions? Representative Bergeron.
Thank you.
And I do have, Patricia Lovejoy has signed up to speak to it and is familiar with the workings of this bill. So I'm just saying that before you ask your question for Ms. Alfano.
If I may, my understanding after reading this bill, and actually some comments made by Senator Gray on Monday during some other hearings, this really is a testing of the accuracy of the AccuVote machines, not necessarily an audit of the election results. Is that correct? Because, for example, there are no audits being done for towns with paper ballots that aren't using the machines.
Representative, I would have to defer to the Secretary of State's office or have Senator Gray follow up on your question.
Okay. With that said, I'll just add that it really doesn't matter to me. I was just curious that about the use of the term audit. I see it more as a testing of the machines, which is fine. Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you.
All right. Patricia Lovejoy from the Secretary of State has also signed up to speak on this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, Patricia Lovejoy, Secretary of State's office. This bill is attempting to address voters' concern about accuracy of elections. It is not an audit in that it is only looking at one machine. So I have no idea how many machines Manchester has, but I'm assuming it's a lot more than one. This would be testing that one machine that was picked from that town. We're talking about, say for the, I think it's no less than four devices that the Secretary of State's office would have picked ahead of time. What towns, we would not notify them. Need to be sneaky. And if they have more than one machine, they would not be any town would be notified by noon that their town was one of the ones selected, but they would not be told what machine was selected. So this is testing one machine. I'm not really sure if we need to put the language in here or if it's just in our procedures, but you'd have to make very sure that all ballots are boxed by what machine they came out of. And you have to make very sure that you don't take anything that comes from the side bin. If a ballot can't be put in, that it needs to go into a side bin. You will have a bill on Friday that's talking about provisional ballots, and those provisional ballots in that bill would be put into the side pocket to be hand counted at the end of the day. So if I've got machine number 5 in Manchester, and there are ballots that are going to be hand counted, I would have to make very sure that I'm not including those when I'm boxing up the ballots that are related to machine number 5, because the machine is not going to have counted those. So I have some concerns that we may not, you may not always get your apples to apples. And all of this needs to be done before Friday morning. The election ends on Tuesday. Tuesday night, everyone is doing their counting. Many times it's into Wednesday morning before they are completed. The Secretary of State's office, much of Wednesday is trying to get all the results from the various locations. These audits with the high-speed scanner, I guess will probably have to be done on Thursday. The ballots need to be brought to the Secretary of State's office, probably the archives, and using this high-speed scanner, which we need to purchase, would be done. My personal thoughts are, what, for each bill, what is the problem we're trying to solve? And in this bill, the issue is voter confidence. I question whether or not it needs to be done by Friday morning. If what we're trying to do is prove that the AccuVote machines are correct and we're doing it on a random sample, we could potentially, if we have this high-speed scanner, do a lot more than 4, but do it, a little bit later than 2 days after the election. If what you're trying to get at is to give voters confidence that these AccuVote machines correctly counted their ballots, I believe it could be done, potentially, the following week or after recounts. But obviously that is a issue that is up for the House and the Senate and the governor to decide. Whichever way you end up doing it, we will, at the Secretary of State's office, we will do whatever the final legislation is. But there will be obviously a time crunch there of getting this done by Friday morning.
Further question, Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you were speaking, it occurred to me, there are a lot of polling places that do use 2 machines when there's going to be a high turnout.
Yes.
Particularly during the presidential election. If you're now requiring the election officials to keep the ballots segregated from, those used in machine X and those used in machine Y, aren't we introducing the possibility of human error, that someone makes the mistake and puts ballots from machine X into cartons for machine Y, and then the results you're going to get actually will not restore confidence in people in these machines, because the numbers will be different. It'll actually cause people to get upset that the machines were inaccurate. So to get to my question, wouldn't it make more sense to test both machines in the polling place and test all the ballots in the polling place so that you get a total number that we can feel confident actually reflects the accuracy of the machine?
That would be a recount, such as we are we already do when people request a recount. You would also have the possibility of, well, the ones that are hand counted all get pulled separately anyway, so that probably is not as much of an issue that the hand count ballots from machine number 5 got put in with machine number 5 AccuVote ballots. But you're right. And towns are not used to having to keep them separate. This would require that they do keep them separate, and if ballots from you had 3/4 of a box from machine 4 and somebody fills it up with the ones from machine 3, and then you are trying to count, you're right, it could do the opposite of what the bill is trying to do, which is to restore confidence. To have more confidence, I guess. I'm hoping that people have not completely lost confidence in our AccuVote machines, because they have been very accurate.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions from committee members? Representative Hayward.
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for taking the question. And it's somewhat rhetorical, I suppose, but are you not missing an important piece of data by taking the ones from the side pocket and not counting them? Now, certainly they did not run through the machine, so as a check on the accuracy of the count, they are not effective, but because they were rejected by the machine, there is data to be analyzed from those numbers as well.
The purpose of this bill is just to confirm the accuracy of the count of the AccuVote machine. and those hand counted, for whatever reason that a ballot ended up in the side pocket and needs to be hand counted, would have to be excluded if the purpose of your action is to confirm the accuracy of the AccuVote machine. If you were doing a full audit, then yes, you obviously need to, or a recount, I shouldn't use the word audit. If you're doing a full recount, you would obviously need to have those ballots included in your recount. But if you're just trying to test the accuracy of the AccuVote machine, you would not include those.
Thank you. Further questions? Everybody set? Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you. Under Part 4, State General Election Audits, it says the Secretary of State shall randomly select 1 to 3% of AccuVote devices. My question is, do you know or have an estimate for how many AccuVote devices we have in the state?
I do not know. I can get that information for you. I know we have about 112, 113 towns that do hand counts. So I don't know the
It's about this, it's just for purposes of the math. Assume it's the same amount for AccuVote because it's 240-something polling places.
minus 113,
Minus
112.
113 is 120, but some of those use 2 devices.
Yeah, even my town of Stratham has 2.
Yeah, Goffstown has 2, and we're 17,000.
Yeah,
So
and
assume there's at least 150 probably AccuVote machines being used.
at least that's probably a good estimate. But I can find out the exact number if you'd
Well,
like.
I was really just looking for kind of an order of magnitude. It's in the hundreds, low hundreds, basically, is what you're telling me.
Low to mid 150. Low to mid.
Thank you.
Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I also have a card for speaking to this, Alvin C.
Thank you, Madam Chairman and members of the committee. My name's Alvin C. I live in Loudon, and I'm here on my own behalf. I was at the Senate hearing for this bill and also at several of the study commission meetings which developed this. And I do recall that one of the stated intents was to do this before the deadline for filing for a recount. And that's why it was to be done before Friday afternoon. So that if any candidate affected by this saw this, they could say, okay, yes, I'm going to call for a recount. I would say that in the event of a mix-up of ballots that shouldn't have been counted or scanned and ballots that should have been scanned, if they were in the wrong box for the wrong machine or however it might have gotten mixed up, that should show a fairly big error. And if that's the case, then the candidates may ask for a recount, or there may be a justification for doing an audit of that town. But I'm not sure what the specific intent was there if that happened. And if there's any questions, I'll answer them.
Thank you. Questions for Alvin C? Seeing none, thanks for coming. I don't have anybody else signed up to speak on SB 366. Excuse me, so I'm going to close the public hearing on 366 and open the public hearing on 405. This is relative to fines and penalties for election law violations. Is anybody here to introduce 405? Representative Hayward is here to introduce 405. Welcome, Representative Hayward.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I noticed that I did not introduce myself the last time I got up here, so this time I'm Representative Pete Hayward from Stratford County District 1, representing the towns today, at least, of Milton and Middleton. So I'm introducing Senate Bill 405 FN. relative to fines and penalties for election law violations. You can see who the sponsors are, and
They're not
are
you.
there any questions?
I'm seeing none. Great job. Thank you, Representative Hayward.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay. All right, everybody has the bill. Anybody have any explanation or comment on it? I'm not seeing any, so I'm going to close the public hearing on 405. All right, so we are actually ahead of schedule for 427, so we will reopen at 11:30. Thank you, everybody. That looks closer to an audit, and this bill did, We are back. This is the House Election Law Committee of the New Hampshire House. Today is Wednesday, April 6th, and we are breaking from our recess to take up our last bill of the morning. We are scheduled at 11:30 for SB 427, modifying the absentee voter registration process, absentee ballot application, and absentee voting process. And with us to introduce the bill, we welcome Senator Susie here, prime sponsor of HB 427. Welcome. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Madam Chair, members of the committee. I'm so thrilled that you're running on time. You're doing a great job today. For the record, I'm Donna Susie. I represent Senate District 18, comprised of the town of Litchfield and the city of Manchester's wards 5 through 9. And I don't want you to be deceived by the title of the bill. The bill was amended. Since its introduction, the bill changed fairly significantly and was very narrowed in scope. We did a lot of work on the bill in Senate election law, and we got it to a place where it passed the committee unanimously with bipartisan support. Currently, the law allows a voter to vote or register to vote by absentee for reasons of disability. As amended, Senate Bill 427 expands the language by saying physical disability, illness or other medical condition. The change is there to provide clarification for voters who do not have what they perceive to be a physical disability, but they can't vote in person because of health reasons. In 2020, during that cycle, at the height of the pandemic, the legislature worked in a bipartisan fashion to allow voters to vote by absentee if they were concerned about COVID by claiming disability during that cycle, which was determined to be allowed. We did, however, receive a significant amount of feedback from the disability rights community and constituents with disabilities who found the conflation of the potential of getting sick and disability as distinct and problematic in the language. So Senate Bill 427, as amended, acknowledges the seriousness of health concerns that are separate from what people perceive as disabilities and recognizes the very legitimate feedback that that advocacy community provided. As I said, this legislation is very, very narrow in scope, and it's really to ensure that when people are registering, when people are voting by absentee, when they're signing a legal document acknowledging a certain status, whether it's being out of town, whether it's claiming to have a disability, there are people for whom the claim of a disability does not seem legitimate, and given their particular medical status, and this bill attempts to clarify that to ensure that people can cast their ballot by absentee. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions of the committee. I also, if I may, Madam Chair, I apologize. I did want to also make note, I understand that there were bills sent over by this committee and the full House to Senate election law that also deal with some of these statutes, and we are looking at those in Senate election law. Working with both you, Madam Chair, and Senator Gray, I think we can resolve any differences or overlaps before things move forward. So with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
The voice of optimism before committees of conference is a wonderful thing.
Absolutely, Madam Chair. Always happy to work with you and any of the committee members to resolve, as I said, any differences so that we're in a good place and moving forward.
Thank you.
And have fewer committees of conference if possible.
Questions, Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Senator, thank you. Just a quick question. You indicated that the bill came out of committee on a 5-0 vote.
Mm-hmm.
Am I correct that it also was approved on 24-0 vote on the Senate consent calendar?
That is correct, Representative Bergeron. It was on the consent calendar. It was not removed, so it was unanimously accepted.
All right, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Further questions for the senator? Seeing none, thank you very much for coming.
Thank you so much.
Also signed up to speak on SB 427 this morning is Linda Bundy. Representative Quayle, you can just pass that along. Welcome back to election, Ms. Bundy.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the House Election Law. My name is Linda Bundy, and I'm from Antrim. Democracy functions best when every voter who wants to vote is able to do so. SB 427 increases access to the vote, enabling greater participation. For people who have an illness or medical condition and wish to vote by absentee ballot, the only option for them to request the ballot is to state that they are disabled. For those who do not consider their conditions to truly be a disability, to swear or affirm on an affidavit that they are physically disabled gives them pause and may be disconcerting enough to prevent them from voting at all. SB 427 provides a legitimate reason for voting absentee that these individuals can swear to with a clear conscience. This expands the access to absentee voting, reducing a barrier that exists for some, providing them the opportunity to exercise this essential civic duty. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Up. Will you take any, does anybody have any questions? Well, I know you can do it if somebody does. All right, well, nobody does. Thank you for
Thank you.
coming again. Does anybody else here this morning want to speak to SB 427? Thank you. Patricia Lovejoy from the Secretary of State's office.
Good morning. Once again, Patricia Lovejoy, Secretary of State's office. The Secretary of State's only comment was a recommendation that after physical disability, put including illness or other medical conditions. So you're not creating a separate category, but you're further defining physical disability. I have spoken with Senator Soucy prior to this, and I am sure we will have some more conversations with the Secretary of State, between her and the Secretary of State regarding this. But this is our recommendation, is on the 14 places in this bill where you've added illness or other medical conditions to include, put the word after disability be including illness or other other medical condition.
Thank you. Any questions? Representative Terosian.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks, Assistant Secretary of State, for answering the question. So, in its current form, have you folks taken a position on this legislation?
Our position is that we would prefer to have it say that illness or other medical condition is part of the definition of physical disability, be physical disability including illness or other medical condition. That is the position of the Secretary of State's office right now.
Follow up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, in essence, with that amendment, the Secretary of State's office would support this legislation?
Yes.
Thank you.
Further questions from committee members? I'm seeing none. Thank you,
Thank you.
Ms. Lovejoy. That is the last speaker I have signed up on 427. Seeing no one else, I'm going to close the hearing on 427. With permission of the committee, I'm going to reopen the hearing on 405. I see that Senator Gaida has arrived. Perhaps he caught the flight that Senator Bradley missed out of Florida. I got Florida on my mind this morning because of his ability to stay there overnight again. So we did have open the hearing, Senator. I'm reopening the hearing right now. Representative Hayward introduced your bill for us, so it has already been presented to the committee. So welcome to speak to your bill.
Madam Chair, thank you for the indulgence you offered today. We were just down dealing with the gasoline tax amendment to the BPT reduction, which obviously had a significant turnout. I'm here as Senator Bob Gaida from District 2 and a prime sponsor of Senate Bill 405. I worked with the Attorney General's office in developing this bill, as well took a look at the very minimal possible penalties for things like vandalism of signs. And when one considers that that sign is an expression of the right of free speech, and that a person who vandalizes, tears down, destroys, steals, or otherwise takes one of those signs is doing much more than a minor act of vandalism. That's an act of free speech both by the person who put the sign in the ground and the person whose property on which that sign is placed. And for those reasons, I put in, the increased penalties for that. I'm happy to walk the committee through the bill. I'll relate a story that perhaps is, in one sense, gruesome, but I years ago, when I was a member of the House, I don't know if you remembered Sagi Tahir or not, Representative Tahir, who's since passed. We went to Kashmir. In the course of that trip, we had a state dinner with President Musharraf and his cabinet. And I sat next to the Minister of Justice, and of course, in the course of the dinner, we're talking, and I made mention of the fact that the amputation of a person's left hand for stealing a pack of bubble gum seems somewhat extreme. And the response was, you don't see many people walking around with one hand, do you? Meaning that the penalty was severe enough that it tended to disincentivize people from committing the act. And so that is the purpose behind this, but I also believe not only is disincentive, but I have respect for that First Amendment freedom. That raising the penalty is something that someone is going to really get hammered with. If the Attorney General's office says, you know what, you did this, now you're going to pay the price because it's more than just wrecking a sign. It's in fact infringing on the First Amendment rights of both the sign owner and the property owner. I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions for Senator. Representative DeRosier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator, for taking the question. So with these kinds of instances, fine amount aside, if somebody gets caught stealing political signs, it comes down to whether or not the Attorney General's office wants to pursue legal action or not, correct? Can you, in a follow-up question?
Go ahead.
Could the person that was damaged by this be able to file a suit without the Attorney General's office willing to do so?
Not being an attorney, I would say I don't know. I'm not sure whether a court would hold, that this I would file a suit as an amendment and infringement on my First Amendment rights as the sign holder, but are you going to go to that extent for a sign that costs you $5 or $10? Or some of the larger 4x8s that I hear are $100 a piece. So I don't know that I've answered your question. I suppose it's up to the property owner or the sign owner, really.
One last follow-up. The only reason I bring it up, I was thinking a small claims court where there's minimal cost to do that if somebody was damaged in some cases repeatedly, if they would have that option as another way to do it without tying up the Attorney General's office.
Right, but then if you look at a sign whose nominal value is $5, all right, who's going to go to small claims court for that?
Right.
The point is, I think that we need to make a point that that sign is an expression of the First Amendment freedoms of the sign holder and the property owner. And for that reason, I think that raising the bar, if you commit that offense, you and election law are seeing this as too, all right? You're watching a widespread disrespect for constitutional law, for law in general, and the way you can, in this instance, I think, help to mitigate that is to go ahead and put a higher penalty on. And I would say here, when you read the language, okay, whoever violates, orders, aids, or abets a violation of the statute relative to removing, defacing, or destroying advertising on private property, it doesn't talk about public property, it's private property, and that's why, shall be subject to a civil penalty of $250. Okay, it doesn't say, there's no latitude, all right? And the Attorney General says, okay, I bring in the case, I have a picture, a film, or whatever. Attorney General goes, you're guilty, right there, and you are subject to this fine. Again, I come back to the constitutional ramifications of someone essentially removing my expression of free speech.
Further questions from the committee? Representative Quayle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My question relates to Section 1, where it puts in a new section. It's starting on line 4 of page 2, where it says, "No person shall use or threaten force, violence, or any tactic of coercion or intimidation to knowingly discourage, interfere with, etc., any election officer." And it relates really to the second paragraph, Roman numeral 2. Whoever violates the provisions of this section, conspires to violate the provisions, shall be guilty of a Class B felony. So my interest was focused by the use of the words discourage, and intimidation. Not being a legal expert, are there actual formal definitions of those two words, intimidation and discourage, under the law? And I ask because intimidation and discouragement seem to me to have a strong subjective component, at least as used in regular English. One person may be intimidated by something that someone else just doesn't even note. So my direct question, intimidation and discourage, are those clearly defined under the current law?
I don't have the answer to that. This language was specifically drafted by the Attorney General, and it came
Okay.
out of some of the results from the last election. In fact, the 2020 election, as you know, was very politically highly charged.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Of course, in which there were instances, for example, at the Senate Bill 43 audit that was done at the Armory, right? I went to that numerous times. I was the impetus behind that bill. And there were citizens there whose action, while not physically violent, was definitely attempted to intimidate. And so there is subjectivity here, and I agree with you that could be a concern. I'm not sure how we would fix that.
Okay.
I tend to fall on the side of the citizen. Again, if I, as a government official, am physically threatened, verbally threatened, that's one thing. And physically threatened meaning, you know, your 3-foot circle of personal space. Somebody comes within that with me, they're gonna have a problem, right? And so, again, we may want to define that better, because I would agree that I always come down on the side of the citizen. That's just who I am. And I think those words are subjective enough that they could subject someone to, you know, a Class B felony is nothing to laugh at, which is
Right.
another potential thing that maybe the committee wants to look at. A Class B misdemeanor, Class A misdemeanor does jail time for a year. I mean, that's fairly serious, right? I mean, think of employment, family, and those types of things. So that clause, I would agree with you. Perhaps the committee might want to look at that and revise that and the penalty.
Okay, thank you. And Madam Chairman, I have a follow-up question. Thank you. This is on section 4, this is page 2, line 11. Except as otherwise provided in this section, whoever violates or orders, aids, etc., any provision of this section or RSA 66414, subject to a civil penalty for each piece of political advertising removed. I was a little puzzled by this because section 66414 refers to, as I understood it, basically the fact you have to identify who put the advertising out. And there's no reference in 66414 that I could find in my looking at it regarding removal of signs. So I'm a little puzzled by that. And the version of that RSA I'm using, I downloaded off the state website, so it might be up to date. Oh. Okay.
I can't answer that. I don't have an answer for you.
Okay, that's fine.
Further questions from committee members?
Madam Chair.
Representative Bergeron.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator. What about an instance, and I know this happens because it's happened to me before, when another candidate puts his sign on another person's private property without asking permission to do so. Does the property owner have the right to remove that sign?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Your bill wouldn't impact that
Wouldn't
at all?
address that, no.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions from committee members? I'm seeing none. Thank you for coming over this morning, Senator.
Thank you, Chair Griffin, and members of the committee for your indulgence. And I'll leave a pink card here.
All right, thank you. I'm going to close the hearing on 405, close it again. And I believe that concludes our business here this morning. You should have all received an addendum calendar. We have a meeting at 10 o'clock, public hearings on our 3 remaining bills. We will be following that, trying to do executive session on a few bills unless we have amendments or specific requests to continue the hearing. The bills at this time I am planning on execing would be 242, 328, 364, and 405. That is subject to further information being received by the chair, but there will be no execing on any bill other than those 4. And we have scheduled an executive session for next week on Wednesday, which will be for all of the remaining bills. We have a total of 10 bills in this committee from the Senate. All bills must be acted on and reported out by next week. So with that, I want to thank everybody this morning, and our Election Law Committee public hearing is over. Have a great weekend. What day is it?